I had a lot of colleagues actually here, and so I had heard about it from before. And, I like the fact that it's both a combination of multiple platforms, obviously the main one being psychedelics. I'm in the longevity world, and then there's also mental health. So for me, it just made a lot of sense. I really love the idea of all the different platforms and then really seeing a lot of these worlds merge and converge. There's this thing called health span, right? And health span versus lifespan. Lifespan is the number of years you're going to live. Health span is the number of quality years you're going to live in. I think there's a little bit of a debate internally about what that longevity actually means. I'm more on the fan of health span. I think it's more important to live to, like, let's say 100 years old and you're 99 and healthy, and then that last year is just, end of life care. I think, the idea of living to 200 years old, for some people that's exciting. They want to be around on this earth forever. I always say I'm happy for 100. If I can live to 99 years old, be super productive, contributing member of society, that's all I care about, for at least for me. I think it really kind of depends on what you do with your life, right? In terms of, like, can you actually do things that increase the quality of your life? One of the things I really lecture about is the longevity mindset. And so it's not just about thinking positive and, oh, okay, in order to live a long life, I have to figure out what makes me happy or find purpose. There's actually a framework. And so I think this framework is something that I really focus a lot on and try to teach, is because we're not really given this user manual about how to live your life, right? I think a large part of it now, there's so much technology and things evolve so rapidly, we actually become disconnected with ourselves. And so I think longevity, even though in the easier sense of the word, it means like live longer, I think it's also about the quality. And so how do we add quality in those years? So quality inside our organs, inside our body, quality inside our mind, and how we think and feel. I think we have this weird biphasic thing, right? We have like longevity now being this hot thing where people are living longer. And now what I see, especially with clients or just even in general, people are getting diseases at younger ages. I mean, I've seen people in their 20s and 30s get cancers, and you're like, well, how's this possible? But I think that's why longevity, beyond the fact of living a long time, it's like, how do we diagnose problems before they become real problems? And so my background is I'm an MD, I'm a double board certified doctor. One's in basically sports medicine, the other one's in interventional pain management. And so what we see now is medicine has always been about treating disease. So what happens when there's like an absence of disease, right? So an absence disease doesn't really have a specialty. And it was only really until, actually as of last year, the WHO, World Health Organization, said in 2022, aging is a disease. Well, now that we formally recognize and acknowledge that aging is a disease, is there going to actually be a formal training program to how to manage disease, right? Because a lot of this has been under the bucket of like preventative medicine. But preventative medicine was like, eat right, don't smoke, don't drink so much. But that's not really that, I'm not going to say it's not interesting. There are more fundamental things that can actually help the body reduce the amount of inflammation and toxic burden in the body. And so that's something I'm also very like keen on. I talk a lot about the four cornerstones of health, and that's basically detoxification, your immune system, inflammation, and stress. Really try to make it simple buckets that all interrelate. And that's what I think is the longevity formula. I call it a bit of an ascension model. I have like a little graph that I do. So basically, it's a cornerstone, and each corner is one of these models. And then I also structure it like a pyramid. At the base of it is inflammation. You've got to address inflammation in your body, and inflammation comes in many forms. In particular, I focus on gut health because a lot of our guts are inflamed with leaky gut, the food not being as nutritious, many things in our environments causing problems with your gut digestion. After that is detoxification. Detoxification basically comes down to things like heavy metal detox. I've actually had to go through my own heavy metal detox because of high mercury levels and high arsenic levels. Then you go into the immune system. We all know that our immune system has been clearly under attack. We've all had problems from, especially post-pandemic. A lot of people's immune systems have been compromised, whether they got the infection or other subsequent problems from that, right? And then last but not least is stress. And stress I call neuroendocrine. So it's basically both your nervous system, right? How your body handles stress from a mind-body component, sympathetic outflow, parasympathetic balance, and then endocrine, which is basically hormones. Male hormones, female hormones, what we see is hormone endocrine disruption. And that's happening because of our environment, even things like in the food we eat, the environmental toxins that we get exposed to. And then at the top of it is what I call mindset. And that's the whole, longevity mindset, which I break down into 5 H's. And so these 5 H's, again, is a framework. I'm very big on training people, teaching people how to empower themselves. Right. Yeah, no, look, number one, most underrated biohack for longevity, sleep. Everyone knows about that you should get 8 hours of sleep, but I think because the science has developed so much more, you know about deep sleep, you know about HRV, which is basically a measurement of how relaxed you are when you're sleeping. Sleep's critical. That's number one. Number two, NAD. NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a supplement. Every cell in your body needs this molecule to produce energy. Your mitochondria make these things called ATP. ATP powers everything from cell functions, DNA repair. Every little critical cycle in your body needs ATP. So NAD is one of my favorite things. The third one that I think is really easy for people to do, or at least they can do it in a more home setting, I'm a big fan of cryotherapy, cold plunge. So ice baths are great. I think when you do ice baths, you really actually start training your body's immune system. Again, something I talk about in terms of what I consider one of the four cornerstones of longevity. The fourth one, I think that's really important, detoxification. I'm currently doing a heavy metal detox program on myself. I just think our bodies accumulate so many toxins in the environment, and it's just hard to avoid it because, most of my arsenic came from actually just eating food. Just plant-based, plant materials, and certain things like rice has high levels of arsenic. So detoxification is important, especially on the heavy metal side. And the fifth one that I'm really a big fan of is basically meditation, mindfulness, journaling. I think the more you spend time to connect with yourself, to actually put pen to paper, write down your thoughts, you're going to gain insight and make better decisions. Because really what's happening now is we're getting decision fatigue. We're getting decision overload. We're having things called like digital dementia because we're not as present because there's just too much access to information. There's that saying, the best time to plant a tree is either 20 years ago or today. That's the same thing with longevity. If you didn't do the things you needed to do for your body 20 years ago, today's the best time to start. And I'm very big on like, how do we have tools that we can do today? What are the mindset tools that we can do? What are the things that we can clear our bodies of poison and toxins? What are the things that can help our body have more energy? These are the things that I see people want. And even in my own life, like having these three things alone, just I feel great. And at the end of the day, like what is happiness, right? What is purpose? It really comes down to these things, right? Because trying to define, well, I'll feel happy if I have this. It's you just start now, right? That's why I say there is a bit of a framework. That's a large part of what I like to focus on. Or how do we define things? How do we create a framework so someone can actually do it and it's repeatable? Right. Well, I think that comes with the terms gut feeling, right? You're trusting your gut feelings on things. And interestingly, for every nerve that goes down to your gut, there are way more nerves that go from your gut to your brain. So if you actually look at it like that, this gut is a very big sensory organ, right? And so that's why you probably do get that gut feeling. Obviously, some people also feel things in their heart, right? So they say mind-heart connection. There's also a mind-brain connection. So a lot of people have actually been talking about how your gut's actually your second brain. And that would make sense, right? It's processing a lot of the nutrients. It has so much other DNA in there that's not your DNA, aka bacterial DNA. And I think that's why we have people who have problems when they have leaky gut. Now this blood, is a disruption in the barrier that protects your body from having infections or let's say antigens, which are basically things that stimulate your body in a negative way. So I think absolutely the gut is an extremely important part of health, not just because of the nutrients it does, it's actually this large sensing organ which actually communicates to your mind. I think purpose is always that very interesting topic. I call this the ikigai of longevity mindset. So, that whole graph where they have all these lapping circles. For me, I call it the 5 H's, right? It starts off with basically what are your habits? What are your hobbies? What are the things that put you into harmony? What are the things you're hopeful for? And last but not least, these all contribute to your home. And in the home, we have emotional home, mental home, spiritual home, and relationships. Because relationships have been shown to be a very good predictor of basically longevity. So that's kind of what I consider purpose, right? The purpose is the accumulation of all these 5 H's because if you're basically balanced in all of these, you achieve that what we call ikigai. It's that overall sense of purpose, at least in your health. And I think without health, it's very hard to have any type of purpose. I think the blue zones are a great example, right? You have these places like in Japan and Costa Rica, and then actually, ironically, in Loma Linda in California is considered a blue zone, right? I think it really comes down to it's the community around you. And so the community that makes it supportive, if you live in a big city, like I've been in big cities for a good portion of my life, it's hard to be healthy because who you surround yourself with does influence some of your decisions, right? Not always, but if it's a late night culture, it's going to be harder to go to bed early when everyone that's out late. I've been in cities where having dinner reservations at 10 p.m. is normal, right? Whereas in other places, like for example in California, people are more likely to go to bed early, like at 10 p.m. So I think it's a big cultural thing. So I think in terms of like health span, like there's actually quite a few interesting things. People want to create these new blue zone communities, right? And so how do you live to over 100? How do you have access to the right food and lifestyle? I mean, it is environmental to some degree, and it's cultural, right? The idea of communion, meaning like people eating together, going for walks after their meals and things like that. So, but I think it really comes down to like spreading information and knowledge. I think the more people know, they'll do something about it. If people knew that certain foods were bad for them or could cause cancer, they wouldn't eat them as much, right? It's just a lack of information, and I think it's also a lack of uniformity because some of the studies might contradict each other. So you have to kind of have to be a bit of a researcher and scientist on your own to kind of just come to your own conclusion on what's right for your body. I think end of life is a normal process. Obviously, I think when you go to a conference like this and is psychedelics used towards end of life care just to give people that insight and peace? Maybe they already have insight and peace. I think end of life is just one of those things. Maybe it's good to think about only because if you knew you were going to die in X amount of years, how would you live differently today? And so when I think of end of life, I actually think about what does it mean to be present here today? Because at the end of the day, when you're at your end of life, you may not worry about all the small things that you're worrying about today, the things that make you anxious, the things that you worry about. Like it may not matter. If it doesn't matter 5 years from now, don't even worry about it today. I did a fellowship in interventional spine, and so what I saw in my field was that a lot of people were getting medications like opiates and injections, and I think there's a time and place for it. But I think, again, medicine's very reactive, and I felt fundamentally this seems pretty broken and complex. Why can't we just cure or treat the underlying problem that's causing this pain? And so very early on, I was very involved in regenerative medicine, and that's just become a passion of mine. In regenerative medicine, there's a lot of overlap in the functional medicine world, which is basically very much an extension of longevity. So I would say it was really due to my own passion of finding answers to not just put a band-aid over the symptom, but actually do root cause treatments. How do we actually help people fix the problem? Whether or not we unlock the full thing, right? There's these 9 hallmarks of aging, which basically gets down to like what happens with your DNA repair, mitochondria, cellular energy, protein folding, all that stuff, right? And so kind of, I think the nice part about those 9 hallmarks of aging is that essentially it tells you, okay, here are the things that go wrong. And I think the reason why we haven't unlocked it sooner is because it's complex. It's just like a very high performing sports car. There are things that you got to replace on it. The gears, the gaskets, it needs new oil, it needs an oil change. Our body unfortunately doesn't work that simple. It's like, if we want to do an oil change of our blood, there's a procedure for that, right? It's called plasmapheresis. It's just not very affordable. It's not always technically very easy to do. So I think that's kind of why we haven't unlocked all the ins and outs of it. Now, we could get to a point where we do all these things, right? You address all 9 hallmarks of aging, and maybe that does extend your life to 50% more, 100% more. Again, now back to the health span quality, is it worth it? To do all these heavy interventions, did you get that life that you want? Did you get that fulfillment that you want? Are you happy? I mean, I think lifespan's important. If someone wants to live to 120, 140, that's your pursuit. If you're going to live to 100, but 99 of those years are really great years, I think that's very satisfying. I think it's both. I think the science overlaps on both sides, right? Because again, maybe it's not about DNA prolonging the life because maybe there's a certain sequence in there that doesn't allow for it. At least if there's a decrease in the inflammation and aging in your body, that means at least the quality's there, right? We all can agree that arthritis can be a difficult problem on your knees. Well, I'd like to walk until the final days, right? I don't want to be in a wheelchair. So I think that's kind of where I think That's how we can achieve our full genetic potential, is decrease the amount of wear and tear in our body. Hi, I'm Dr. Holland, and one of my favorite things I do for longevity is NAD. NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and what that is a molecule that every cell in your body needs to basically produce energy. There's this thing in our body called mitochondria, and that's in every living cell in our body, and it uses NAD to produce ATP. The reason why we age is we don't have enough NAD, and that's because NAD is used to help protect the DNA repair, cellular functions. It helps with your brain performance, your gut performance, your liver, and your kidneys. So you can imagine if your NAD levels decline, that's one of the reasons why you age. And so one of my big areas of interest in research and also for clinical application is how do we use NAD to slow down the aging process? How do we use NAD to help heal problems? And how can NAD be used as a longevity molecule? That's drhalland.com, or you can find us on Instagram. We post a lot of stories and reels that will cover a lot of this, and that's the same handle, Dr. Holland.